Welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter. We continue this audiobook with Chapter 3 of clarifying the definition, techniques, and integration of self-development to enhance Army Officer Leader Development. Copyright 2016, Franklin C. Annis, ed.D. ISBN 9781521311615. The right of Franklin C. Annis to be identified as author of this work has been asserted by him in accordance with Sections 77 and 78 of the Copyright, Designs and Patents Act 1988. All rights reserved. The dissertation manuscript was edited for the purposes of producing an audiobook. Any in-text citation will not be read, but the reference to the various sources and authors will be displayed in the text on screen. Before we begin, we invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter for more videos on the topics of military self-development and military history. Chapter 3, Research Method. The Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program, which produces over 55% of commissioned officers, is failing to cultivate the self-development skills required for resourcefulness needed to be adaptive on the modern battlefield. The current design of Reserve Officer Training Corps lacks instruction on critical skills, like self-development, required to solve complex problems that officers are likely to encounter during their initial assignments. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin E. Dempsey, has asserted that the most critical task to improve leader performance is to rebalance the Army leader development model. In the 240-hour curriculum of classroom instruction in Reserve Officer Training Corps, only a single hour is dedicated to self-development. This lack of focus on self-development is having a significant impact on Army leaders, as it is impossible to achieve optimum potential without the active component of self-development. With officers asked to lead in high-stress environments and venture into non-traditional military roles in modern warfare, it is critical that officers possess the ability to self-direct their education as required to ensure mission accomplishment. The purpose of this qualitative electronic Delphi study was to define the concept of self-development as it applies to Army officer leader development, and to develop provisional training protocols or curricula to facilitate rapid acquisition of self-development skills among junior Army officers. The purpose of this study was fulfilled by answering the following research questions. Question 1. How is self-development defined within the scope of Army officer leader development, and how should it be defined? Question 2. What self-development techniques could be utilized to enhance each of the Army leadership dimensions? Question 3. How can the selected self-development techniques be integrated into Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program? 13 senior officers were surveyed through the electronic Delphi study method to define self-development, suggest methods of self-development, and identify self-development integration techniques. These officers were of the grade 05, lieutenant colonel, or higher, and had experience working with officer-producing programs. Recommendations could be used to augment the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program's ability to meet and fulfill the current leader development needs of the U.S. Army. Self-development techniques will be designed with the intent to a. Develop officers capable of conducting decisive action, and b. Utilize interdisciplinary scholarship to develop critical thinking needed to solve complex problems. This study was conducted from Nebraska with survey participants located throughout the American Midwest. An electronic Delphi method was used during this research in an attempt to find solutions to the deficiencies currently found in the definition and application of self-development in Army officer training programs. In this section, explanations will be provided on why the Delphi method was selected, including a brief history of the traditional and electronic Delphi research designs. Furthermore, the plan for how the electronic Delphi method was applied for the purpose of this study will also be presented, including information on participant selection and qualifications. A description of measurement techniques and Delphi survey design will follow. Data collection, processes, and analysis will be explained in detail. The significance and validity of this research will be elaborated along with its limitations. Finally, the ethical protection of participants will also be explained. Research method and design. The Delphi method has been selected to conduct this research on defining the concept and determining techniques of self-development to aid in Army officers' leader development. Originally developed in the 1950s by Norman Dorkey of the Rand Corporation to establish the number of atomic bombs needed to address the Soviet threat, the Delphi method has a deep history in dealing with complex and often not entirely understood problems of the U.S. military. But it is more than just its long military heritage that caused the Delphi method to be selected for this study. The Delphi method can condense and clarify the opinions of multiple experts into a unified and useful voice. Given this ability to draw upon the experience and opinions of various experts in a field of study, the Delphi method is helpful in developing forecasts and improving the understanding of complex problems. The contributions of individuals via this tool produce a group perspective not otherwise attainable. Delphi methods, as it relates to this research, was also useful in identifying solutions and opportunities related to expanding Army officer leader development within a college environment. Rowe and Wright identify 4 key features of a classical Delphi study. These features are: the Delphi surveys are conducted in such a way as to ensure anonymity of participants. This prevents the selected experts from being influenced by undue social pressures to conform to other well-known experts in the Delphi study. Therefore, all responses are assessed based on their quality instead of the projected value of any particular author. The Delphi process is conducted in iterations. As the study progresses, experts are allowed the opportunity to refine and develop their thoughts and responses based on the feedback they received in the form of moderator-composed synthesis of all of their responses for a given round of analyses and in view of the progression of the larger group of experts. This process continues with every round of the Delphi surveys. Controlled feedback is provided to participants by the researcher/moderator within the Delphi process. This controlled feedback provides the various experts with the thought processes of other experts within the study. After reviewing this feedback, an individual expert has the ability to further clarify his/her thoughts or adapt the view of others within the study. The responses from the Delphi surveys are statistically aggregated. This aggregation allows for quantitative research methods to be employed on the resulting data. This allows for effective analysis and interpretation of data. While Rowe and Wright would state that these 4 features are required in their definition of a classical Delphi study, other scholars have deviated from these requirements to create non-classical Delphi models. These modifications were utilized to better meet the needs of the individual study topic. The qualitative research methods of the Delphi research format produce a holistic understanding and detailed data on complex problems. Delphi studies not only seek to answer questions in a naturalistic group conversational setting, but they are also useful in determining the meaning that participants place on given phenomena. The exact number of survey response iterations is determined by the speed with which the experts come to a consensus or scholarly saturation is reached. Scholarly saturation is defined as the point at which no further progress towards consensus can be made and no new information or ideas are being suggested. While it is not always the case, homogeneous experts tend to reach consensus in fewer rounds than experts of a heterogeneous nature. This research study on Army leader self-development utilized an electronic Delphi method. An electronic Delphi method uses the advantages of online survey platforms opposed to original paper and pen-mailed Delphi surveys of the past. The advantages of an electronic Delphi method include the elimination of paperwork and mailing, which increases the communication speed and convenience to the participants. The increased speed of the survey delivery translates into increases participant motivation and participation that can lead to increased validity in comparison to the traditional Delphi method. A literature review has already been conducted to determine criteria for selecting expert panelists. Working with the 3rd Brigade Commander of Army Reserve Officer Training Corps and the Adjutant General of the Nebraska National Guard, qualified individuals were identified and invited to participate in this study. To be a qualified participant in this study, prospective panelists had to have achieved the minimum rank of Lieutenant Colonel, 05, and have experience as an instructor in an officer-producing program. Participants were assigned pen names for the sake of anonymity. The pen names consisted of the names of various second lieutenants who were awarded the Medal of Honor. This study began by having the panel of experts evaluate the current definition of self-development as defined in Department of the Army Pamphlet 350-58. The experts also reviewed the Malcolm Knowles definition of self-directed learning. The experts were then asked to define the concept of self-development specific to the needs of junior Army officers. The panelists were then directed to compose a list of self-development techniques, specifically, the self-development techniques that would allow for the rapid acquisition of new skills and knowledge required for problem-solving in complex operational environments with accompanied fragmented situational awareness. The experts were asked to list self-development techniques in specific enough detail that they could be utilized to improve each of the Army leadership dimensions listed in the Army Doctrine Publication 6-22. Finally, the panelists were asked to suggest methods of integrating the discovered self-development techniques into the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program. Statistical Analysis utilized the analysis tools of the SurveyMonkey platform. Mean confidence ratings for definitions were tabulated and evaluated as expert recommendations for retention, mean ratings 3 or above, or elimination, if mean ratings fall below 2, and modification, as indicated by a separate response/comment box for experts. At the conclusion of the first round, the suggested definitions and self-development techniques were coded and prepared for presentation during the second survey iteration. The proposed definitions of self-development produced in Phase I were analyzed and coded into clauses and subcomponents. In the second survey, the experts were asked to rate clauses and subcomponents utilizing a 5-point Likert scales to assess the panelists' confidence. Text blocks were also provided so that the experts could justify their responses and/or propose revisions. This rating system was also used to assess the suggested self-development techniques. Panelists were instructed to rate the proposed self-development techniques in their confidence in their practical application. The mean confidence ratings for self-development were tabulated and evaluated as expert recommendations for retention through the mean score of the sum of the 7 rating criteria. Retention, mean ratings 3 or above, or elimination, if mean ratings fall below 2, and modification, as indicated by a separate response/comment box for experts. Additionally, this survey asked experts to review the current Reserve Officer Training Corps curriculum or horse blanket and suggest how the proposed self-development techniques could be integrated into the current curriculum. In the third survey iteration, rating and discussion on self-development definition clauses and proposed self-development techniques that had not reached consensus continued. A composite definition of all the previously accepted clauses and subcomponents of self-development was assembled and presented for review and rating. Additionally, the expert panelists were asked to rate the proposed integration of select self-development techniques in the Reserve Officer Training Corps curriculum. This process utilized the same 5-point Likert scale and provided a text block for further comment on the actual implementation practices for the selected technique. The fourth survey iteration allowed experts to further rate and discuss any positions of the previous surveys that have not reached consensus or academic saturation. At the conclusion of this survey, a definition of self-development as it applies to Army officers was established. Additionally, Provisional Reserve Officer Training Corps training protocols or curricula to facilitate rapid acquisition of self-development skills among junior Army officers were suggested. A pilot study was conducted that simulates the entire data collection process, utilizing officers from the Nebraska Army National Guard of similar background and experience to the panel of experts, prior to formal survey iterations. This pilot study ensured that the survey questions are understood and provide an indication of the time requirements for each survey. Survey questions were modified based on the finding of the pilot study to increase clarity and time efficiency. One of the critical aspects of executing a successful Delphi study is the selection of the group of experts that will be surveyed. Given that this study was created to define the concept and application of self-development to enhance officer leader development, the experts utilized for this study were from officer-producing programs. A section of 13 high-ranking, lieutenant colonel or higher, officers were invited to participate in this study. It was the intent of this study to include participants from all three components: active duty, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard. Unfortunately, while invited, no members of the Army Reserves volunteered for this study. These participant selection criteria ensured that participants have held leadership positions, and gained knowledge, expertise, and qualification that would qualify these individuals as experts in the field of officer-producing programs. Establishing experts with the experience in the correct occupations and or positions with the right knowledge, expertise, and qualification is critical for ensuring the quality of the study. The homogeneous nature of the participants should yield positive results. Powell suggests that homogeneous groups are superior to heterogeneous groups because they tend to produce a higher proportion of high-quality, highly acceptable solutions. While it is suggested that a large study population group would yield better results than smaller groups, as the number of participants increase, so do the demands of processing data and ensuring adequate participation of the study group. The depth of examination of the problem also suffers. However, the reliability and validity of the consensus process with a Delphi study are unaffected by the size of the study participants. Stitcodes and Crew suggested that with participant groups that have a homogeneous nature, that between 10 to 15 participants would be adequate population to conduct a focused Delphi study. It is with this recommendation that the population of this study was limited to that sample size. Given the complex nature of the various problems associated with designing a well-developed Army officer leader self-development program, the flexible nature of Delphi research makes it an ideal research method for this study. The Delphi method allowed for program design and development while furthering the understanding of the various problems it seeks to solve. The utilization of a Delphi study in this topic would also allow the translation of the current identified needs of Army leaders into course designs specifically created to meet these needs. Before the start of the Delphi study, formal permission was sought through the Reserve Officer Training Corps 3rd Brigade Commander and the Adjutant General of the Nebraska National Guard. The Reserve Officer Training Corps 3rd Brigade Command influenced active duty and Army Reserve officers that meet the qualifications to participate in this study. The Adjutant General of the Nebraska National Guard did the same for National Guard officers that were qualified to participate. These commanders encouraged qualified individuals to take part in the study, increase the number of participants, and ensure that study participants were allotted enough time to attend adequately to the study, increase the quality of participation. Population. Congress approved the U.S. Army a total end strength of 1,115,300 soldiers for the 2013 fiscal year, 552,100 active duty, 358,200 Army National Guard, and 205,000 Army Reserve. From 2000 to 2011, Army commissioned officers on average accounted for 20% of the active duty force. Assuming that Army commissioned officers also account for 20% of the Army Reserve and Army National Guard, the total population of U.S. Army commissioned officers is approximately 223,060. The intent of this research is to improve the self-development with U.S. Army junior officers, lieutenants, who account for 44% of officers below the rank of Brigadier General, 07. With Army officers directly responsible for leading U.S. Army soldiers into combat, these individuals provide the best population to study leader development within the U.S. Army. Sample. According to Day and Bavea, participants should consist of individuals with knowledge about the substantive area of research, the motivation to engage with the inquiry process, and be able to articulate judgments. For these reasons, the participants for this study were selected based on their military rank and duty positions associated with commissioning sources. All participants met the minimum rank of Lieutenant Colonel, 05. Gaining the rank of Lieutenant Colonel is a hallmark of a successful career as Army officer. Officers in the grade of Lieutenant Colonel serve as senior leaders and managers throughout the Army, providing wisdom, experience, vision and mentorship mastered over many years in uniform. Lieutenant colonels have had personal experiences being promoted through the officer ranks, including experiences as lieutenants, and function as senior raters for junior officers in the officer evaluation system. These experiences provide the required experience of being a lieutenant and understanding of the current development needs of junior officers. Given that Reserve Officer Training Corps produces officers from all three Army components, active duty, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard, participants were solicited from all three to ensure that the program designed would meet the needs of every component. Participants were also required to be currently assigned or had supported commissioning programs. Support may be during active military, civilian, or contractor service. This ensured that all participants were knowledgeable about standard practices within commissioning programs. The combination of the high rank requirement and direct experience with an officer-producing program ensured that all participants had the knowledge, expertise, qualifications and had held the positions and occupation that would be required to become an expert in this field. The participants were randomly selected from a variety of locations to further prevent bias that might be caused within specific geographical regions. A major advantage of utilizing Army officers of this rate is that they have completed the intermediate level education requirements of officer education system. This course is similar to graduate level program and requires the production of an academic report similar to a master's thesis. Many universities accept intermediate level education for partial completion of graduate programs, like the University of Maryland that accepts intermediate level education as completion of 15 graduate hours. Having completed this level of military training ensures that all qualified experts in this study are accustomed to formal academic research. Additionally, unlike other populations, like school teachers that are not accustomed to providing written critiques that may interfere with the depth of communication provided within a Delphi study, Army officers are accustomed to the formal, after-action review process. Given that Army officers conduct after-action reviews throughout their careers, in which they are required to provide detailed enough responses to appropriately modify training and unit performance, it is likely that they will execute Delphi survey responses with the same degree of proficiency. Since the participant selection requirements are very selective, the resulting sample group should be relatively homogeneous in nature. Therefore, it is likely that this homogeneous nature will reduce the total amount of surveys required to reach consensus or idea saturation. The homogeneous nature of the sample group also allows for the use of a small sample size or between 10 to 15 participants. This sample size will likely yield manageable amounts of data for faster and less complex execution of the study. Unlike other forms of research, the validity and reliability of Delphi research is not negatively impacted by small sample sizes. Materials/instruments. The U.S. Army doctrine processes a list of key leader attributes and core competencies that have proven to make effective combat leaders. This list appears in the Army Leadership Manual, Field Manual, 6-22, and was revised to a total of 23 leadership dimensions in the Army Doctrine Publication, Army Doctrine Publication, 6-22. Self-development techniques suggested within this project will be designed to improve one or more of the 23 leadership dimensions. The selection of this measurement assumes that the Army, through its long history of scholarly development, has identified all the leadership dimensions required to be an effective Army leader. Data collection, processing, and analysis. An electronic Delphi study was conducted to provide a critically missing understanding of the concept and application of self-development in officer leader development. The online SurveyMonkey platform was utilized for the use of presenting and gathering data from the Delphi survey iterations. Delphi studies were designed and a pilot study was conducted within the Nebraska Army National Guard to ensure the survey questions were comprehensible. The survey was posted on the SurveyMonkey website. Participants were allowed a 2-week period to respond to the survey. At the conclusion of the 2-week period, all submitted material were analyzed and a new survey round was developed. This cycle continued until consensus or idea saturation was reached. The 13 survey participants were selected by use of strict standards to ensure advanced-level military experience and knowledge of officer-level Army leader development. Materials produced through the text submissions reviewed and coded in an attempt to identify themes on self-development training. To aid in the future analysis of materials gathered, 2 open-source qualitative data research software programs were utilized. The Text Analysis Portal for Research, hosted by the University of Alberta, was utilized to conduct a thorough text analysis of the research materials including participant responses. The aim of the analysis was to identify emergent themes in recommendations of participants about self-development training requirements. Text analysis also included identification of thematic term frequency, concordance, co-occurrence, collocation, and use of fixed phrases. Additionally, the Coding Analysis Toolkit, hosted by the University of Pittsburgh, software program was employed to further examine themes within the research results. This electronic Delphi method was assisted by the use online SurveyMonkey platform. The use of an online platform was selected to allow for more communication between participants and increased likelihood that they will be willing to accept diverse views. A survey rotation began with the posting of survey questions within the SurveyMonkey platform. Participants were notified by email of the survey being posted and were asked to respond to the survey within a 14-day period. At the conclusion of the survey, 7 days were allowed for the review and analysis of all materials that were posted. 3 to 6 survey cycles typically occur in a Delphi survey. The total time prediction for this study design being between 9 to 18 weeks for completion. The time to complete a Delphi study can exceed several months. The timelines for the Delphi survey iterations were selected to ensure a balance between the panelists' ability to adequately address the survey questions while keeping the overall processes within a reasonable period. Assumptions. The U.S. Army Cadet Command has identified several research assumptions when examining the leadership development approaches utilized in Army officer development. The following assumptions have been previously utilized in the Junior Officer Leader Development Study, and apply to this research design. The study should presume that effective leaders can be educated, trained, and developed. The study should assume that what the study sample say they do and self-report about their practices is what they actually do. The study should assume that improvements in the Reserve Officer Training Corps/BOLCI Pre-Commissioning Leader Development Program, structure, process, and content, will improve leader development, regardless of subsequent interventions that occur after commissioning and before arrival at first unit of assignment. Additionally, assumptions in this study include: self-development significantly impacts leadership abilities and is required for leader optimization, as reported in Army Leader Development Model. The study pool should include individuals from all 3 Army components, Regular Army, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard, to best represent the leadership development needs of the U.S. Army. Limitations. Study length is the most significant limitation. The U.S. Army is still conducting combat operations in Afghanistan, also other peacekeeping and nation-building operations around the globe. High operational tempo can restrict participants' time to contribute in the study or prematurely end their participation. To negate the threat of early participation withdrawal, a study population of 15 was targeted. By doing so, the study could lose up to 30% of the participants without the attrition of participants threatening the validity of the study. Delimitations. This study investigated the definition and techniques of the Army Leader Development Model domain of self-development. The impacts of domains of operational experience and institutional learning on leader development was not be examined. The study participants were selected from all 3 Army components, Regular Army, Army Reserve, and Army National Guard. Participants were of the minimum grade of Lieutenant Colonel, 05, and had experience working in an officer development program, U.S. Military Academy, Officer Candidate School, and/or Reserve Officer Training Corps. The results of this study are generalizable to Army officers with emphasis on developing Army Reserve Officer Training Corps cadets. The results of this study are not generalizable to enlisted, non-commissioned officer, and/or civilian leader development programs. The study design is specific to the U.S. Army leader development and is not generalizable to other branches of the U.S. military, allied militaries, and/or other government agencies. Ethical assurances. This study was conducted in a manner that ensures the ethical protection of the participants. The tenets of the Belmont Report, including informed consent, protection of participants' privacy and confidentiality, were strictly observed. Additionally, this research complied with all required specified in Department of Defense Instruction Number 3216.02 concerning research involving Department of Defense personnel. The nature of Delphi research lends itself well to ethical assurances. The Delphi method is dependent on anonymity among its participants to avoid bias or the influence of social pressure. This anonymity lends itself to the ethical protection of the participants. Contributors were assigned screen names for use during the study. Participants will also be instructed not to include any data within their responses that might aid in identifying themselves. For example, instead of a participant writing "when I was commander of the 110th Multifunctional Medical Battalion," they would be simply asked to write "when I was a battalion commander." Since the selection criteria for this study has already identified these individuals, there is no need to provide detailed biographical information within the surveys to justify a participant's opinion. As a result of this anonymity, participants were free of any negative impact that this study might have from expressing their opinion. All potential study participants received an email inviting them to join the study. This email also included their rights as participants, the purpose and structure of this study, guidelines on how to maintain anonymity in responses, and a consent form for those that wish to contribute. Participation in this study was fully voluntary. Participants were allowed to stop contributing to this study at any time without any negative implication. Study participants were also allowed to enter responses of no judgment to individual research questions if they do not wish to respond or have no opinion on any particular study question. The anonymity of all participants was retained by never revealing a list of participants in the published results. Summary. The intent of this research was to produce a definition of and techniques for applying the concept of self-development of Army officers to address deficiencies currently known in Army leader development. It seeks to rebalance the application of the Army leader development model by clearly proving means and techniques for self-development. The purpose of this project was to aid in the development of decisive and interdisciplinary officers that are capable of self-directed learning to prepare them to meet the ever-changing demands of the modern battlefield. The Delphi method was selected because of its long-standing application to complex military situations and the ability to solicit practical and applicable thoughts and opinions of a collection of experts. This qualitative research method allowed the participants to explore and expand on the issues being studied and the possible academic solutions to these issues. Given the complex nature of the multiple problems this research attempted to address and the difficulties of turning theories and suggestions into executable plans, the Delphi method was uniquely suited for this type of research. With over 55% of commissioned officer graduating from the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program, any improvements that could be made to support this program could have dramatic impacts on Army leadership. While many studies have been conducted to identify current problems within the education of Army officers, most of which suggesting plans to correct these problems, research on how to implement these suggestions have not been conducted. This study seeks to provide practical application of the integration of self-development techniques into Reserve Officer Training Corps to improve the quality of future Army officers. With the fate of the American national security dependent on the actions of newly commissioned officers, it is imperative they are providing the best preparation possible for their complex duties. This is the end of Chapter 3. Thank you for listening. Please click on the link provided to continue on to Chapter 4, Findings.